I slid my chair back from the table so quietly that no one noticed until I was already standing. My uncle was still talking, gesturing toward the house, explaining to the entire living room full of family why I had no right to be there, why I had no claim, why Grandma Joan would have wanted it this way. 43 people sat around him, nodding or staying very, very still, and I just thought, fold the napkin, set it down, walk to the door. The bell rang before I touched the handle. I should explain how we got there, because it didn't start that day. It started 22 years ago, in a kitchen that smelled like cardamom and dish soap, with a woman who let me stand on a step stool beside her while she made butter tarts from scratch, who never once told me to go play somewhere else, who called me her girl like it was the most natural thing in the world. My grandmother, Gran Joan, was not a soft woman in the way people mean when they say soft. She didn't fuss, she didn't cry at movies. She drove a half-ton Ford F-150 until she was 79 years old and parallel parked it better than anyone I know. But she was soft in the way that mattered. She paid attention to the things you didn't say, to the way you held your shoulders when someone asked you how school was going, to the cup of tea she'd already put in front of you before you even knew you needed it. I was 31 years old when she died, and I was the one who had been there. That part matters. That part is the whole story, really. My mother and her brother, my uncle, grew up in a farmhouse outside of Orangeville, Ontario, about 90 minutes northwest of Toronto. Gran Joan raised them mostly on her own after my grandfather passed in the early 90s. She kept the property, she kept the accounts. She kept everything running with a kind of quiet competence that her children somehow took as evidence she didn't need help, rather than evidence she was extraordinary. My uncle moved to Calgary when he was 26. He married a woman named, well, I'll just say my aunt, and built a life there. Good life. Big house in a new subdivision, 2 kids in hockey, a landscaping business that genuinely did well. He came back to Ontario for Christmas every few years. He called Gran Joan on her birthday. That was the relationship. My mother stayed closer. She's in Brampton. But closer meant she visited maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And the visits got shorter as Gran got older. Not because she didn't love her. I believe she loved her. It's just that my mother has always been better at loving people, from a safe distance where nothing is required of her. And then there was me. I moved in with Gran Joan when I was 29. Not because I had nowhere else to go. I had a decent apartment in Guelph, a job doing administrative work for a veterinary clinic, a life that was going along fine. But Gran Joan had a fall in November. Nothing catastrophic. A fractured wrist and a bruised hip, not even a hospital stay. But when I drove out to check on her and found her trying to fold laundry one-handed while refusing to admit she was struggling, something settled in me. I called my manager the next morning, asked about remote work, then I asked Gran Joan if she'd like some company for a while. She looked at me over her reading glasses for a long moment. Your mother put you up to this, she said. She doesn't know I'm here. Another pause, then, you'll take the back bedroom. There's extra blankets in the cedar chest. I stayed for 2 years and 3 months. They were, genuinely, some of the best years of my life. And I know how that sounds when I say it, like I'm trying to make myself into some kind of saint, the devoted granddaughter who gave up her life for family. That's not what it was. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was just time with someone I wanted to be near while I still could be. We had a rhythm. I worked remotely at the kitchen table in the mornings while she watched the news. We walked the property after lunch when her hip allowed it. In the evenings we played cribbage, and she cheated with a completely straight face and denied it when caught. She taught me how to properly hem a pair of trousers and how to read a balance sheet, 2 skills she considered equally essential. She told me things she'd never told my mother, about her own childhood in New Brunswick, about what it was like to be young in a small town in the 60s, about my grandfather before he got sick, about her own mother, who had died before I was born, who had apparently been formidable, in a way Gran Joan missed every day. She also told me, once in a matter-of-fact tone that I didn't understand the weight of at the time, I've handled my affairs. You don't need to worry about any of it, but I want you to know it's been handled. I thought she meant her insurance paperwork. I didn't ask. She died on a Tuesday in March, a stroke in her sleep. The doctor said it would have been fast, would have been peaceful. I am choosing to believe that. I was in the house. I heard nothing. I woke up and made 2 cups of tea and stood in the kitchen for 4 minutes before I understood why she wasn't coming downstairs. I called the paramedics. Then I called my mother. Then I stood on the back porch in my socks in the snow and watched the light change over the fields she'd tended for 40 years, and I tried to let it be real. My uncle arrived from Calgary 2 days later. My mother arrived the morning of the funeral. There were relatives I hadn't seen in years. Cousins, my uncle's in-laws, my Gran's oldest friend who still drove herself down from Collingwood at 81. The funeral was at a United Church in town. 43 people. Tulips, because that was what Gran Joan had written down she wanted. Not lilies, tulips, she'd said. They're cheerful, people have enough sadness. We had the reception at the farmhouse after I had spent 3 days quietly preparing the sandwiches, the squares, the coffee urn, the borrowed folding chairs. My uncle took the seat at the head of the living room and told stories about his childhood and laughed loudly at the right moments. My mother circulated with the napkin tray and talked to everyone with warmth she always managed to produce in public. I refilled the coffee. I washed dishes. I slipped past people to get more napkins from the kitchen. My aunt, my uncle's wife, found me by the sink. She wasn't unkind about it. She was almost gentle, which is why it felt so cold. "Have you thought about where you're going to go?" she asked. "After, I mean. Now that you'll need to find somewhere new." I looked at her. "The property," she said, as if clarifying something obvious. "Walter, my uncle, is the oldest, and he's the one who's been handling the financial side of things for Joan for years. So obviously it'll go to him, and then to your mother and him together. It's just practical. You know how these things work." I did not say anything. I turned back to the dishes. She patted my arm once and left. "I should tell you something about my uncle and handling the financial side of things." Gran Joan had a financial advisor in Barrie, a woman she'd worked with for over 15 years. She also had a lawyer in Orangeville. My uncle had, at some point in the last 4 years, decided he should be the one communicating with both of them. I didn't know this when I moved in. I found out slowly, the way you find out most things. A mention here, a comment there. My uncle's name appearing in a context I hadn't expected. Gran Joan, when I asked her about it once, said simply, "Your uncle likes to feel useful." And then she changed the subject. What I understood from that, without understanding all of it, was that there was a story underneath the story I was being shown. I just didn't push. It wasn't my business, or so I thought. The dishes were done. The coffee urn was empty. People were beginning to leave in small groups, the particular energy of a reception winding down. The hugs at the door, the retrieval of coats, the lowered voices. My uncle called for everyone's attention. He stood in the middle of the living room, holding a glass of sparkling water, with the settled authority of a man who has decided something is his room. People gathered. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway. Some stood slightly beside Spar. "I just want to say a few words," he said, "about what comes next, for the family. Because I think Joan would have wanted us to be clear-eyed about this, rather than letting uncertainty drag on." People nodded. Funerals make people want resolution. He knew that. "The property has been in this family for over 50 years, he said. "It should stay in the family. I've already been in contact with Joan's lawyer about the estate proceedings, and I'm going to be taking point on the transition. There will be some conversations to have." He glanced at my mother. "But the priority is making sure this is handled properly." Another pause. Another glance, this time at me, by the people who are actually in a position to manage it. The room was quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when something is being said that people don't quite want to hear aloud. My cousin, one of my uncle's kids, maybe 20 years old, looked at his phone. Someone's chair shifted, and then my aunt said, clear as anything, her voice carrying across the room, "We also want to acknowledge how much it means that Mara was here for Joan. We know that wasn't easy, and we hope she's been able to save something for herself over these past couple years." A small smile. It can be hard to think ahead when you're so focused on the present. There were 37 people watching me in that moment. My mother's hand moved as if she might touch my arm, then didn't. "Save something for myself. 2 years of my life, in this house, and that was the sentence she chose." I pulled my chair back from the table, quietly. Set my napkin on the seat, stood, and then the doorbell rang. I almost didn't move. I thought someone had left something in their car and come back. I thought it was a neighbor arriving late. I opened the door because I was closest to it, and because I needed something to do with my hands. The woman on the porch was wearing a charcoal wool coat, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She looked at me with the direct, unhurried expression of someone who has had this conversation many times before. "Hi, I'm looking for the family of Joan Meredith Ashworth." She glanced down at a folder. "I'm Patricia de la Cry-Home. I'm the notary and estate lawyer. I apologize for the hour. I had a client emergency earlier today that pushed my schedule back considerably. May I come in?" I stepped back from the door. The room had gone very still. Patricia, Ms. de la Cry-Home, did not take the offered chair. She stood near the fireplace with the portfolio open and spoke in the measured, neutral tone of someone who has long since stopped taking sides and now simply delivers information. "Joan Ashworth completed a comprehensive estate plan in February of last year," she said. "This included a will, a secondary directive letter, and the instrument I'm here primarily to speak to, a revocable trust that became irrevocable upon her death." My uncle set down his glass. "I wasn't aware of a trust." "No," Ms. Delacroix-Holmes said. "You were aware of the previous will from 2019, which has since been superseded. Mrs. Ashworth updated her estate plan, significantly 14 months ago." "Who drew this up?" he asked. His voice was still measured, still controlled. "I did, at her instruction. She contacted my office directly." A pause. Mrs. Ashworth, she continued, opening the portfolio, was very clear in her instructions and very clear about her reasons. The trust holds the farmhouse, the surrounding property, the contents of her primary savings account, and a non-registered investment account. She looked up. The named beneficiary of the trust is her granddaughter, Mara Ashworth. My mother made a sound. Not words, just a sound. My uncle did not make any sound at all. That was somehow worse. The trust includes what is sometimes called a no-contest clause, Ms. Delacroix Holmes said. Any attempt to challenge the trust in court would result in the challenging party forfeiting any benefit they might otherwise have received. I want to be transparent about that. She looked around the room with the same unhurried calm. Mrs. Ashworth also left a letter. It's addressed to Mara. I read it later that night, after everyone had left. The living room was quiet. The tulips from the church were in a vase on the mantel. The dishes were done again. I had stood at the door and thanked people as they left, not knowing what my face was doing, only knowing that my body was going through the right motions. My uncle had been the last to go. He stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at me with an expression I couldn't name. Not quite anger, something more complicated than that. He opened his mouth once and then closed it, and then he went to his rental car and drove away. Gran Jones' letter was 3 pages, handwritten on her good paper. The cream-colored stuff she kept in the roll-top desk in her bedroom. She wrote that she knew what she was doing. She wrote that she had watched, for years, who showed up and who didn't. And she wanted it on record that she was not confused about the difference. She wrote that the property had been her life's work and that she was leaving it to the person she trusted to love it, and not simply sell it. She wrote that she hoped I would stay, but that if I didn't she would understand, because some things are too heavy to carry, and she knew that too. She wrote, I have handled my affairs. You don't need to worry. I just wanted you to know. I saw you. Every day. I saw you. I sat in her chair, in her living room, under the lamp she had turned on every evening for 40 years, and I read those 3 pages twice through and then a third time, and then I just sat there in the quiet for a while. The weeks after were not easy, I won't pretend. My uncle retained his own lawyer in Calgary and made some initial inquiries about the trust. Ms. Delacroix Holmes had been clear about the no-contest clause, and after presumably a conversation with his own counsel, my uncle did not pursue it further. He sent me a brief email about 3 weeks later. No apology, just a statement that he hoped we could maintain a civil relationship as family. I read it twice and didn't respond for 10 days, and then I wrote back. I hope so too. That was all. It felt like enough. My mother came back to the farmhouse about 6 weeks after the funeral. She called first, which she never used to do. I made tea. She sat at the kitchen table and looked around at the familiar room with an expression that was hard to watch, and then she said, I should have been here more. I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't entirely fine, but I said you're here now, and I meant it. She came back twice more in the following month. She learned where Grandjohn kept the spare dish towels and how to get the old wood stove to draft properly and which neighbor left eggs on the porch on Fridays and expected nothing in return, except a wave. It wasn't fast and it wasn't uncomplicated, but it was something. I've been asked, by a few people who know the story, whether I feel guilty, whether I think Grandjohn was being fair, whether it was right for her to leave everything to me and nothing to her own children. I've thought about it. Honestly, here's what I keep coming back to. She didn't leave it to me because I was her favorite. She didn't leave it to me to punish anyone. She left it to me because she had watched, over 79 years, what happens when you leave something to the person who wants it. Most rather than the person who actually tends it. She had seen her own mother's property divided and sold within a year of her death. She had made a different choice. Was it fair? I don't know. I'm not sure fair is the right category for this kind of decision. Was it hers to make? Yes, completely. And she made it with full clarity, over a year before she died, with a lawyer she had chosen herself, documented carefully and with full legal authority. She was not confused. She was not manipulated. She was Grandjohn, sharp, plain-spoken, quietly formidable, and she saw exactly what she was doing. I choose to honor that. I stayed in the farmhouse. I kept the roll-top desk in the bedroom. I kept the coffee tin she used as a pencil holder on the kitchen windowsill, the one with a picture of a lighthouse on it, from a trip she took to Cape Breton in 1989. I kept the step stool, the one I used to stand on when I was 9 to reach the counter where we made butter tarts. The property needed work. Fencing along the north side. The kitchen needs updating. The mudroom roof has been untrustworthy for a decade. I'm handling it in order, one thing at a time, the way she would have. This spring I planted a kitchen garden where she always said she wanted one, and never quite got around to starting. Tomatoes, herbs, kale that came in better than I expected. I called my mother when the first tomatoes came ripe, and she drove out and we sat on the porch and ate them off the vine like we were children. It was seasonum. It was the kind of afternoon that doesn't announce itself as significant while it's happening. You only recognize it later. The way you recognize most things that matter. I found a photograph last autumn when I was going through the cedar chest. Gran Joan, maybe 40 years old, standing in front of this house in summer. She's squinting a little in the sun. One hand is on the doorframe. She's looking directly at the camera like she knows exactly where she is and exactly what she's doing. I framed it. It's on the mantel now, beside the window, that looks out over the fields. Every morning when I come downstairs, she's there, looking at me, steady. I know this house now the way she knew it. Not perfectly, not yet. But I'm learning it the way she did. Room by room, season by season, in the ordinary dailiness of just being present, paying attention, showing up. That's all she ever asked of anyone. That's all she ever did.